Thank you, Carmel. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of our conference. I'd like to thank, actually, Carmel and everyone on the conference committee for making such a smooth, well-run conference. I know what they're like. And just before you all walked in here, while Danny and I were here, 2 swallows flew in and they were fluttering around up here, and the manager came in, spoke bird to them, and they flew out. But that's just, I think, just shows how well organized this conference is. My second thank you, I just wanted to thank everyone who's been involved in the implementation of the strategy, and thank Chris in particular, who's been pulling all that together. And it really struck me yesterday that when Chris was showing that there's 1,000 staff members in Conul and 101, gosh, I nearly said Dalmatians, 101 participants, that's nearly 10%. So nearly 10% of Conul membership are involved in the implementation of the strategy. And just to reinforce that all the directors on the board, we have heard loud and clear how everyone wants to be more involved. And I think that's a real milestone, and all credit to colleagues who are involved. So it now gives me enormous pleasure to introduce Danny. About 2 months ago, after Trinity College Dublin had joined LERU, which is the League of European Research Universities, which is a really, it's a lobbying organisation. It's a very, it makes position papers, and it's great for Ireland that we've joined LERU, because it acts on behalf of all European universities, even though there's only 20-odd universities in LERU. It acts on behalf and lobbies at the heart of Europe, particularly European finance ministers. It lobbies on behalf of research universities, or research. So everyone in this room, it lobbies on behalf of that. And the way that it carries out its business, it's a very lean organization, and it carries out, there's lots of networks and all sorts of different groups, but there's about 9 policy groups who do the bulk of the work. And they do position papers. And the one that the library directors are on is called the Information and Open Access Group. Anyway, so I joined it for the first time. The meeting was in Edinburgh, and I met this feisty, lively Australian who really knew her stuff, was deeply impressive. And I was also really struck, I mean, you can read Danny's bio, I'm not going to do a CV, but I was also really struck by her communication skills. And if you do read the bio, you'll see that there's a past history in journalism, and also as a science communicator, and that came over very, very strongly. And in fact, very few people have already lined up all their timed tweets ready to go out on the right time zone. Very impressive. So I would like to give a very warm welcome to Danny, who's going to pick up on particularly one of the key elements that Lorcan was talking about yesterday. So, Danny.
Thank you very much. So my mic's on? Yes, good. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I hope that what I've got to say will be interesting to you and may make you think. So I'm going to talk, first of all, a bit of history about publishing and about journal publishing in particular. So for a long time, nothing changed at all. We had the Proceedings of the Royal Society that was published initially in 1665, and basically until the end of the Second World War, the same things happened. Most scientific publishing was done by learned societies, and the only means of printing and distributing these material is through the publishers. The only means of accessing that material is either to have a personal subscription to it or to visit a library, like actually walk into a library, things that a lot of researchers don't do anymore. So there was a symbiotic relationship between libraries and publishers. They needed each other. So publishers needed the libraries to buy and subscribe to this material so that they could then share it with their communities. And the libraries obviously needed the publishers, otherwise they wouldn't have the material. Now, just to let you know, I will go back. So the slides are available here. I have tweeted that out, and on that record in the repository is also a document that has got the list of tweets. For those people who don't tweet, you've got the list of tweets, and the thing that I've got on all of them is going to be any of the links that are on these pages. So you don't need to scribble down desperately links and things. All of the links will be tweeted out as I talk, assuming I really have got the time zone right. Anyway, at the end of the war, there was an enormous growth in the sort of professionalisation of science. And as a result of that, there was a real increase in the commercial publication of research material. So they happened in parallel, because really it was science that won the war. And so if you look at the advertising of the time in this sort of like the 60s and things, it's all about new materials and about the future, and scientific's going to save us. And so there's this real movement towards professionalism of science, increase in the number of scientists, increase in the number of or the amount of science output. Then in the 1970s and then through to 1995, this was right at the end of the print publishing period, and this is when the serials crisis started. Now, some people in the room will be old enough to remember this. For those of you who are not old enough, you may have heard of it, but there was this real problem because the golden age of all the money that was flowing in the 1970s, the 60s and 70s suddenly stopped. And so suddenly we've got all these subscriptions and we don't have enough money to pay for them. So this was the serials crisis. And there's language like the shelves were groaning under the weight of all of the journals and so on. This is the sort of language that was being used. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read a story. This is a lovely story called Tadpole's Promise. And it's a story about a tadpole and a caterpillar. So, I know right at the back you're not going to be able to see the detail, but this is a tree with a caterpillar on it, and this is the pond with the tadpole in it. Where the willow meets the water, a tadpole met a caterpillar. They gazed into each other's eyes and fell in love. She was his beautiful rainbow, and he was her shiny black pearl. I love everything about you, said the tadpole. I love everything about you, said the caterpillar. Promise you'll never change. I promise, he said. So what I'm talking today about is change. So we're sort of thinking about what's going on in the print world and the publication world. At the same time, something happened in the early 1990s. The internet did exist then, but it was mainly being used for sort of non-commercial practices, military practice and academic practice. It was not publicly used. And then what happened as a result of this is there was a real sense of opportunity felt by the academic community. So we've got two things here. One of them is archive.org started. So physicists had up until then photocopied their preprint papers, called preprints because they were not yet printed. So they'd photocopy them, send them to their friends and say, what do you think of this idea? And then, of course, the internet meant that you could actually sort of send things around. And so people were emailing them to one another, but inboxes were filling up very quickly. And so Paul Ginsberg said, hang on, how about we put them in a kind of central place and then you can pull them back out again. And you can, so instead of having your inbox filled up. And so archive.org was created, first repository. A couple of years later, in 1994, Stephen Harned published his subversive proposal. And the subversive proposal was saying, hang on, we do the writing of the papers and we do the peer review and we do the editing, and we don't need to rely on the publishers to do the printing and distribution anymore because we can use this thing, this internet thing. Why don't we just do it ourselves? So the academics could see that there were real possibilities here. Then in 1995, the biggest change the world has ever seen happened, which was the World Wide Web. So the internet existed before, but the web didn't exist until 1995. I've referenced here, this is really, really quite funny. So it's a sort of TV show called The Computer Chronicles, called The Internet, and it's got a guy sitting in front of, an enormous old-fashioned computer looking like a big, enormous television, and with a cup of coffee, and he's going, "Who says online users are a bunch of antisocial geeks? Here we are in a cafe, and where you get the best of both worlds, real people and online people. That's the growing power of the internet." So it's quite funny to watch because it very much contextualises how far we've come since then. It's very easy to think there's always been the web. Well, there hasn't. Where do I need to point this? There we are. Okay, back to the story. But as sure as the weather changes, the tadpole could not keep his promise. Next time they met, he'd grown 2 legs. "You've broken your promise," said the caterpillar. "Oh, forgive me," said the tadpole. "I couldn't help it. I don't want these legs. All I want is my beautiful rainbow." "All I want is my shiny black pearl. Promise me you'll never change," said the caterpillar. "I promise," he said. But as sure as the seasons change, the next time they met, he'd grown arms. So then, after the web, journals started going online. So researchers were publishing freely available, and I'm using that term on purpose, freely available journals from about 1993. And then there was a small study. Now I say it's a small study because you may notice that the author of that study was a certain, Kingsley, which it was my honours thesis. What I was doing was I was looking at the attitudes of researchers towards this sort of new online journals. What did they think about them? And I looked at different disciplines' attitudes towards those journals. The spoiler for it is that they thought they were pretty rubbish. So if you want to read the thesis, feel free, but that's the kind of conclusion. So here's a graph from a PLOS publication, and it indicates the sort of exponential movement of open access publishing, and it really sort of took off around the sort of 2003 period. It sort of really started shooting up at that point. The red line are online journals, and the blue line is online articles, so they sort of match one another. So there was this sort of question about serials crisis. And so one of the solutions that was sort of put forward to the serials crisis was this thing called the big deal. Now, most of you, I'd imagine, are familiar with the big deal. So it was brokered in the UK with a company called Academic Press. Now, in 2000, Academic Press was acquired by and is now part of Reed Elsevier. Then in 2002, the term open access, so that's why I was talking about freely available before, because it was not open access at that stage. The term didn't exist until the Budapest meeting in 2002. Now, what's basically happened after that was every time people had a meeting in a place that started with a B, they had their own sort of manifesto about open access. So there's been the Budapest, and there's the Bedevisa, I can never say it properly. There's one from Brisbane. There's a fourth one, which I can't remember. Anyway, and Peter Suber, who is sort of like, the godfather of open access, came up with the opening line of an old tradition and new technology have converged to make possible an unprecedented public good. So that was the beginning of open access. But there was it's not just the academic community that saw opportunity here, it was the publishers as well. And so this is a very interesting article that's just been published by a group of people. It was only published a few days ago, really, last week, and it's worth reading. And it really does talk about about the money, where it follows the money trail in academic publishing. And one of the comments they made was that because they were big and they had enough money to invest, they were really able to sort of really move into the online academic publishing space. And so the things that they sort of generated in that space were big deals, the ability to sell individual articles, because you couldn't do that before. Well, you could, but it was more complicated. Paid for data, like usage statistics, and also things like charging for text and data mining on material for which people already had subscriptions. But the one that I think is very important, we will come back to this paid for data one, later on. So back to the story. So he'd grown arms, that's where we were up to. "That's twice you've broken your promise," cried the caterpillar. "Forgive me," begged the tadpole. "I couldn't help it. I don't want these arms. All I want is my beautiful rainbow." and all I want is my shiny black pearl. I'll give you one last chance, said the caterpillar. But surely, as the world changes, the tadpole could not keep his promise. The next time they met, he had no tail. If you haven't worked it out yet, it's an analogy. So, the beautiful rainbow in libraries, and I can tell you it is actually very difficult to get a photograph of a caterpillar that's not scary, a colourful caterpillar that's not scary. Most of them have lots of like sticky outy bits that make them look a bit frightening, but these ones are nice. So the libraries are the caterpillars, and the beautiful shiny black pearl is the publishers. So libraries also started changing. So libraries obviously have been taking responsibility for providing access to research output for a long time, and then they embraced this new technology, these sort of repositories. And so Cambridge, and in fact my old university, Australian National University, is a test bed institution for DSpace. And this is the old DSpace logo. We've now upgraded our instance of DSpace, and it looks different now. But so in 2003, Cambridge had a repository. It wasn't necessarily very well used, but we had it. But it was the publishers that really, really started changing. So they started doing things that's more than just publishing. So this is something called the Elsevier Publishing Campus. What do you think of when you think of campus? Where you can go to the College of Skills Training, or the College of Career Planning, or the College of Recommended Organisations. There's a slight language appropriation going on here. And at the end, you can get a certificate signed by the managing director. They're also providing careers advice to the research community. Now, this graph, if you haven't seen it before, is part of a project that's being done out of the University of Utrecht. The group that are working on it it might be a bit hard to see, but you've got 3 different concentric circles here. And the inside one is 2005, the middle one's 2010, and the outside one's 2015. And then in each of these little, well, not quadrants, sections, are parts of the research process, the research life cycle. And what they've done is map different tools to the different sections of the research life cycle that were available to the research community at the time. And as you can see, there's not a huge number in the middle, and there's heaps and heaps on the outside. It's a really interesting project. If you haven't had a look at their website, it's really worth a look. This is the breakdown of the tools that Elsevier owns out of that list. And you can see that there are products on every section of the research life cycle, in some cases more than one. So Elsevier is working towards really making sure that it's able to provide services, shall we put it that way, to the research community throughout the research life cycle. And it's not really just the research life cycle, it's actually the researcher's life cycle. So Lorcan mentioned yesterday about Hivebench. So that's an electronic lab notebook system that you can use that is free to use. You use it right from the start of your research project, and then all your data goes into it, and it's easily transportable. You can move the data into the next project and the next tool along the system. So right from the beginning of the process, you can be involved in using these tools that look different. All the logos are different, but they are actually all owned by the same company. So I use Mendeley, knowing full well that Elsevier is watching everything I do. But it's now becoming a bit more aggressive. This is an email I received not long ago where I had the opportunity to publish my data through Mendeley. Very generous. I mean, I have my own repository to do that, so I don't really need to take up that service, but there you go. It's quite aggressive, this attempt to kind of grab data from the research community. Now, the problem with this, because somebody asked this question a while ago, what does this matter? Maybe if they're doing better than, if they've got these good tools, who cares? The problem is that if you've got something that's owned by a commercial company that whose motive is profit, which is perfectly fine, that's what commercial companies are for, then you really are at their mercy. And this was the point made by Mike Taylor in this particular blog that he talked about. Because Mendeley and SSRN, Social Sciences Research Network, have both Mendeley a couple of years ago, but last year, Social Sciences Research Network, SSRN, were bought by by Elsevier, getting all mixed up here. And the problem is that they're only going to be there as long as they continue to be profitable. And there's a lot of investment and information that is already in those systems that has been put in good faith initially and suddenly is now owned by a large commercial company. Now, this approach seems to be working quite well for Elsevier. You'll see this is an article that came out a couple of months ago saying 2 stunning growth stocks that could make you rich. Sounds like one of those things, you can lose all your belly fat with this one simple trick. It sounds a bit like that, but it is actually, it is a genuine article. But one of the things that I've pulled out here is that they're talking about how successful they are and they're doing very well commercially, and that this is actually a company formerly known as Elsevier as it moves to digital data services and away from traditional print formats. This is a deliberate strategy that is working very, very well for Elsevier. But it's not just Elsevier. This is not an Elsevier bashing system. It's just that I've happened to have some good examples of theirs. This is a service, in fact, Chris Presley was involved in the initial work with the Sherpa Romeo. Now, Sherpa Romeo is a very complicated and long acronym for which I can't remember now, it's lost in the annals of time. But because we're wacky and zany people, its sister one is called Juliet, because we've got great senses of humour in the library community. Anyway, so what this is so Sherpa Romeo gives you your kind of what you can do with your papers. So you can say, I'm publishing a paper in Nature, and it will say which version is it, and then you can tell you whether you can make it available or whether there are any restrictions on it. This sister service is talking about funding. And so it says, you are funded by blah, therefore this journal is or is not compliant. Where are we? Now, Wiley is also providing a service that tells you what to do with your funders. Why it is doing this and duplicating work that is already being done by the community is a mystery, because this is no joke compiling this information. There's a lot of investment in doing it and doing it properly. It seems somewhat unnecessary. However, we'll see here, oh, look at that. That looks like a research life cycle to me. And so this is one of the services they provide on one of those dots, and you can click on the different dots and see all the different services that Wiley provides on the different parts of the research life cycle. Wiley also provide advice on student retention services, which seems a rather odd place to be inserting your work and your expertise. I wouldn't have thought that a publishing company would have a huge amount of knowledge about student retention. Maybe they do. Then this came through in April to the head of our research office at Cambridge. Now, I've blocked out the name, but it's a person saying that they work for Nature Research, Institutional Partnerships Manager, blah, 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 blah. I'd like to speak with you about the ways Nature Research can support his role at the University of Cambridge and offer their expertise and solutions in science publishing, fair enough. Communications, yeah, fair enough. And grant funding applications. This is a rather strange area to me. I don't know, maybe I'm naive. So let's move back to the story. So he had said, he had no tail. You have broken your promise 3 times, and now you've broken my heart, said the caterpillar. But you're my beautiful rainbow, said the tadpole. Yes, but you are not my shiny black pearl. Goodbye. And she crawled up the willow branch and cried herself to sleep. And there's the poor little tadpole thinking of his beautiful rainbow. So now we come to questions about what is the role of the library. And it came up yesterday in the session that I was at about library skills. I think it was John Fox's talk where he was talking about the sort of do we partner or do we support? That sort of question. And this is something that seems to be coming up a fair bit, I'm finding, because I go to a lot of conferences, of library conferences. In fact, my husband the other day said, because I said, oh, there's something going on in Calgary next year about the future of library. And he said, I don't understand your job. He said, you seem to go to conferences and talk about the future of the library a lot, and then nothing changes. And I said, yeah, that's about right. Anyway, at the RUK conference, it wasn't like a theme or a topic, but it did come up all the time, and it was this question about, are we partners or are we support staff, you know? And so the collaboration idea, and there was a lot of discussion about technology, and maybe we need to bring in technologists, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we, you know, do you train up your current staff community, library community, or do you bring in people from outside, benefits or both ways for those sorts of things, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I wrote up a blog about that discussion if you're interested in it, and so that's the link, which of course, fingers crossed, has been tweeted out. So let's talk about scholarly communication. So this is a definition from 2003 from the Association of College and Research Libraries, and they talk about the system through which, you know, research and other writings are sort of disseminated and assessed and so on. And rather sweetly, because it's 2003, they talk about both formal means of communication and informal channels such as electronic listservs, because of course blogging didn't exist in 2003, so you know the world's moving on quite quickly, but that of course is part of it. So scholarly communication is something that runs across the whole institution of a research environment, but usually it's run out of the library. Usually the scholarly communication process is actually a library responsibility. So I'm now going to talk to you about change in an institution, about trying to get change through an institution. So I work in one of the biggest institutions in the world that is really designed, has systems designed to maintain the status quo. It's very much set up to not change. So I spend a lot of time in that particular room, sitting around a table, and it's kind of echoey and it's a bit hard to hear people. I find it, you know, and people always introduce themselves, hi, I'm so there's these big discussions that go on around this table, and then it may be that the decision's made through a recommendation from a paper that's been put forward through the agendas a month beforehand that's been circulated, that we might put through a recommendation to a different committee. And then you write a paper and you put it in a month beforehand to the agenda, blah, 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 blah. And then maybe, you might actually get something agreed. We agreed that we want to roll orchids out across the university, for example, except we can't tell the researchers to do anything, so it's voluntary. Makes it a bit hard to implement, but anyway, at least we got that through. The other way is you can do this thing, which is Regent House. I haven't attended, I can, I've signed the big book at Cambridge, so I can attend one of these, but Regent House is whenever anybody who's a member of Regent House can put forward a sort of proposition and it gets discussed at Regent House. You've got to wear your gown. So I've got a gown that I'm prepared to lend to somebody who wants to go if they want to turn up, who doesn't have a gown. But you can go and people, and something may or may not get passed at Regent House. So these are the two sort of means by which you might get something sort of agreed to by the university that I'm in. But change is very slow, certainly for me, who likes to see things happen. So this was I came across this by chance actually. We were cleaning up some stuff in the office and there was millions of folders, you know, in the olden days people would print out web pages and then put holes in them and put them into a folder, lever arch folder, it was one of those. And anyway, I was looking through and found this newspaper article that was talking about the new, at the time, Vice-Chancellor, the one before the one we've got now, and she was trying to do something with the IP policy, which I think was why it was there. But I found this kind of interesting that this was talking about a report. So this was in 2005, so that article itself was 12 years ago, but it was talking about a report that had happened 2 years before that, which had come to the conclusion that the ancient system of governance has come under attack in the past for being too cumbersome and ill-designed for the 21st century. There was recommendations that it actually changed. Well, that has not happened. And so it's very, very hard when I'm working in an environment that's very fast changing to then have to really translate things back into slow motion to try and get them through the system. Now we've got a problem as well, because in academia we've got an esteem economy. So unlike journalism, which is what I used to do in the olden days, you get paid per word. So you write something and you get paid for it, end of transaction. It's not the same in academia. You write something, you don't get paid for it, but what you do get is if you get sort of good citations and people say this is a good piece of work, you might then at the next time you go for a job, promotion, or you go to become a fellow of blah-de-blah, those writings become your kind of your esteem, and that's your sort of that's your transaction, that's your coinage. So there's not a direct not a direct transaction there. Now, the problem with this, apart from the fact that that's the reason, one of the reasons why subscriptions went through the roof, is that if you change the way you reward things in academia, you are running a risk. For the people who've been successful in academia and the institutions that have been successful in academia on the current system, there is a very strong disincentive to change. Because if you change the way you reward stuff, you might not come out on top under the new system. And the people who make decisions in institutions, especially academic-led institutions, are the people who've been successful under the current system. So there's a problem there. There's also a problem. This was a talk by Tom Cochrane. Tom Cochrane he's now an emeritus, but he was the Pro-Vice Chancellor at Queensland University of Technology when it was introduced the first institution-wide open access policy. And so he came out to Cambridge to visit, and I said, oh, can you do a talk? And so he did. And what he was talking about was research integrity and the necessity to really change the way we work to meet these changing environments of research integrity issues. The last thing you want is to have your institution up on a front page of a newspaper saying fraud case. And so he was saying the nature of science is changing, and so we need to actually manage science differently. But the problem being that often these e-research techniques, which are kind of an old-fashioned term, but e-research techniques have been growing in a way that may not be understood or well led by senior administrators. So what often happens is we talk to PhD students, we say, here's this stuff, open access, blah, 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 sharing economy, let's talk about open research, or talk about open peer review, blah, 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 blah. They go back to their supervisors who say, I've never heard of this, or that's really dangerous for your career, you must publish in this way. And so we have this really, really big disconnect between a group of enthusiastic young people down below and these, not all older, but more senior people above, sort of saying, no, do not change the way you've been doing things because this works. So it's a bit of a problem. Then we've got, within an institution like Cambridge, the administration. So let's say the ORCID thing. So we've got to try and implement ORCID. Now this involves all sorts of stuff, like making sure that you can actually link to your ORCID in the system, the research administration system, the information system. We're talking to human resources about can we actually put it into our HR system. It's really, really hard to do all of this. And then we've got the colleges, my goodness. Okay, so I needed to send out emails to all of the people for whom we had a scanned thesis to say, like alumni, will you give us permission to make it open access? Pretty straightforward. I had to contact all of the colleges with the lists from each college of who the people I was going to contact, because alumni from the colleges are a source of income for the colleges. And so there is a process you have to go through to make sure that you don't kind of tarnish that relationship. So this is sort of like an added level of just difficulty to get anything done. So, despite all of that, we do actually get stuff done. So this is what we do in the Office of Scholarly Communication at the university. We do funder compliance and research data management. We do lots of training, and our strategic goals are online if you want to have a look at them. We're also loud and proud. If you're interested in the sort of stuff that we do, the Office of Scholarly Com at Cambridge is very, very public in what we do. So we've got lots of blogs about the sort of stuff that we do. We do lots of debates, and we do this in a very open manner. So this comes down to the question about whose place. Is it our place to be doing this? Is it our place? This is the support versus the partnership thing. Is it our place to be telling the research community what they should be doing? And I say yes. I say yes, we should be driving this agenda. Because what you have, and this is not a criticism of any individual researcher, but researchers see, well, everybody sees things through their own view. And they don't see things that are outside. And quite often, they see things and assume that everything outside their view is the same view as their own. And so we had somebody on the Open Access Project board who was a biology person who was shocked that journal articles might sometimes take a year or 2 years between acceptance and publication. Because in his discipline, it's quite fast. It hadn't occurred to him that it could be different. Now, that's not unusual. He's not a bad person or stupid or anything. That's quite normal. But when you're in scholarly communication, you're taking a meta view. You are the person that is actually able to advise because you can see across. The library is the neutral space, has come up a couple of times already at this conference. It is the neutral space because it's in the middle and it looks over everything. So I do think it is our place to be doing something here. So let's wrap up this story. We left the story with the caterpillar crying to herself in the cocoon. And then one warm moonlit night, she woke up. The sky had changed, the trees had changed, everything had changed. Except for her love for the tadpole. Even though he'd broken his promise, she decided to forgive him. So here she is, the beautiful scholarly communications caterpillar, flying around. She dried her wings and fluttered down to look for him. Where the willow meets the water, a frog was sitting on a lily pad. "Excuse me," she said. "Have you seen my shiny black?" But faster than she could say pearl, the frog leapt up and swallowed her in one great gulp. And there he waits, thinking fondly of his beautiful rainbow, wondering where she went. So, we're in a bit of trouble. I did this talk as a practice run last week back at the university as a sort of opportunity for people to see what I'm talking about, but also to give feedback. I actually ended the talk on this. And they said, you just can't. It's just devastating. You've got to give some hope. So here's a little bit of hope. Okay, so we can't leave it there. So the thing is that, look, publishers aren't, evil or anything. They're not doing anything that other large organisations that deal with information are doing elsewhere. All right? Now you think about who owns your data. Like Facebook and Twitter and Google and Amazon. Have you actually read the terms and conditions? Like you think about Figshare, for example. Figshare can delete your data sets whenever it likes. It's in the terms and conditions. But we feel okay about doing all of that, don't we? Because we like Facebook, it's useful. One of the points that came up was somebody actually said, hang on, I'm going to say that in a minute. One of the comments in the talk when I gave the other day was she was saying, look, the problem is if tech companies take over the world, it gets built in their reflection. And that's not necessarily a good thing. And it's not necessarily what we want. So this is a sort of like alert thing that I got the other day on my computer, and it was talking about data we process when you use Google. And it's sort of saying, when you search for a restaurant on Google Maps or watch a video on YouTube, for example, we process information about that activity, including information like the video you watched, device IDs, IP addresses, cookie data, and location. That's Big Brother. That really, really, really is way beyond Big Brother. It's really frightening. And then you start thinking about, Helen this morning was just saying that she's got her phone out there because she didn't have it charged up. It's out the front getting charged by the hotel staff. She's saying, I'm lost without my phone. Can you remember anyone's phone number anymore? You used to, 5605940. That was my home phone number when I was a kid. I actually I kind of remember my phone number at home now, sort of, but I use my phone. Somebody in the talk, she said, I actually have to sometimes look up friends on Facebook to remember their names. That's a bit scary. So it's not just libraries that are under threat by this kind of changing nature of information management. Publishers are being threatened too. This is my screenshot from ResearchGate. It's really interesting. I know the algorithms they use are incredible. They're saying, are these items part of the same project? No, they're not. But then they've got this other suggested article that might be interesting. Yes, it does look interesting to me. And then what they do have is, we found your full text online. Quickly upload your full texts. Now, ResearchGate's very dodgy about actually giving you proper information about what you can and can't do copyright-wise. It does give you a little kind of checklisty thing, but if you don't know what that means, and most people don't, you're just going to upload the one you've got, the final fancy version. And this is a real problem for publishers because ResearchGate is really the mother of all repositories. It is huge. It's got full text of an enormous amount, and you don't have to be a member of ResearchGate anymore to actually see this stuff. So it's basically like just putting it all out for free. This is a problem, a really big problem for publishers. Academia.edu is similar. Don't be fooled by the .edu part of it, because it was actually registered as .edu before you had to actually have educational affiliation to use the .edu. It is actually the company's .org. It's a commercial organisation, as is ResearchGate. There is nothing at all to stop either of those organisations at any time just shutting down and charging for access. And in fact, academia.edu have just started charging for certain searches. This is what happens when a whole lot of information gets held in private hands. So, let the games begin. So this has just happened. Elsevier is now... Has anybody not heard of Sci-Hub? All right, so we all know what Sci-Hub is. All right. So, I don't know, I think the chances are minimal, but nonetheless, they're putting in a piracy suit to Sci-Hub for damages. Now, the interesting thing about Sci-Hub is it's not just threatening the publishers. So this is an article that was in Science last year, and it was talking about who's downloading pirated papers. Now, if you look at where these big blobs are, and you actually have a look at because it's an interactive map, you have a look at the map, the blobs are where research institutions are. The usage of Sci-Hub is very heavy in areas where people already have legal access to this material. And there's one reason why, because it's easy. And Helen yesterday talked about, I think, about the issues about the challenges of downloading things and having to log in by proxy. I don't know, this is a bit embarrassing. I have not actually successfully from home been able to download an article from my library because I can't work it out. I'm logging in and I'm finding it in the catalogue, but I can't actually get the thing. It's like, I need a training course, which is a bit dodgy. You shouldn't need a training course to be able to download an item. And this is like Google, you just put it in and it turns up. So, to give you hope, what can you do? All right. So this is a report that came out of the MIT Institute-wide task force. They looked at the future of libraries, and the sorts of recommendations they have are really thinking about a lot of if you think about what Lorcan was talking about yesterday, about the sort of looking externally, about disseminating research out. So you're being global as well as local, that your audience is not just your institution, your audience is the world. And talking about creating skill generation in information assessment, giving people the ability to validate and assess work, quality of it. Comprehensive digital access to collections. So that's digitising material that may be only in physical form, but also making sure the metadata is accessible, it's actually mineable. Generating open content platforms, providing the ability for your research community to publish in ways outside of the traditional publishing systems. They're doing it anyway. Open access policies and preservation. These sorts of things are all the sorts of things that are actually dealt with in the area of scholarly communication. I know it's my area, I know I've got a vested interest in selling it, but I do think it is the future of libraries, and I think that if we get on board and we do something fast about this, we're not going to get eaten. So, there's lots of work to be done. In Queensland, I've driven around Australia twice, and we did it in 2014 with the children, 26,000 kilometres, it's a long way. And in Queensland, there are very, very, very long stretches of nothingness. And so what they do is they have these signs along the road to keep you interested, like quizzes, a quiz question. And they're like, 50 kilometres later, the answer. And these were one, how long to go, Dad? And then ages back, still a long way to go, kids. All right, so there's a lot to be done, but I think we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. That was phenomenal.